Hi, this is Lito Velasco, star of All Through the House, composer of Don't Fall Asleep and The Confession of Fred Krueger, struggling actor, sometime producer, sometime book editor, and the guy who lives life in Hollywood one day at a time in the lands of dreams and silicone. And you are listening to Elm Street Radio. Welcome to prime time, bitch!
Hello, Elm Street fans. This is Diandra
and Paige.
Welcome to This Week in Elm Street Radio. It is so awesome, can I just say, first of all, to have Paige back with us. She has been super extremely busy. Paige, can you give us a lowdown of what's been keeping you so busy and what's been going on in life?
God, not only have I missed Elm Street Radio, but I've missed chatting with Diandra and the guests on here. It has just been a super whirlwind, crazy storm of Fred heads. We had our crowdfunding, which finally ended. Our submissions finally ended. And I started a new job. And things have just been super busy. And finally, everything has calmed down. And I'm just so excited to be back.
Well, we are glad to have you back. And really happy with everything that's going on, you know, with your new job and everything like that. I know you're in a really great new place right now and lots of things going on with Fred heads over the next year. So everybody out there, make sure that you pay attention to the Facebook page just in case there might be a Fred head in your area. And I don't know if you saw this page. Did you see, this is kind of like a This Week in Elm Street, but did you happen to see that Jason statue that was underwater in that lake?
Oh my gosh, I totally saw that, yes.
That was so cool, and apparently they're going to be doing a Freddy one now in another lake.
So are they going to put it in the lake?
They're going to put it in a different lake, I think. But I'm a little confused because I don't understand why Freddy is in a lake. I mean, it's cool. He went from bathtub to lake, but...
Right. I feel like they should put him in like a hospital boiler room or something. So like the workers like go down there and they just see a random Freddy person.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Or like in an abandoned hospital and people go exploring and they like turn the corner and there's Freddy. I think that would be really cool. Really cool. But I still think it's really neat for those divers who go out there and find it. I thought that Jason looked super creepy. If I was not a horror fan and I was diving and I found that, even if I was a horror fan and I was diving and I found that, I think I would be substantially creeped out.
Totally.
Substantially. But speaking of being a horror fan and a lot of things going on with the world of A Nightmare on Elm Street, today we have a very, very special guest on, a friend of ours and somebody who has an incredible list of things he's done, not only in the world of horror, but certainly in the world of A Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, you might know him from Never Sleep Again. You will also know him as a super A Nightmare on Elm Street fan who just so happened to portray Freddy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And he is also a composer who just so happened to work on 2 fan films. The one is The Confession of Fred Krueger, and the other, I don't know if you guys have heard of this. It's something about not falling asleep. Never fall asleep. Don't fall asleep.
I don't know. Maybe? I've never heard of that. I don't know what film you're talking about.
Let's not tell Lito we don't know about that one. But please welcome to the show, everybody, Lito Velasco. Welcome, Lito.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. It's my great pleasure to be here, guys.
No, thanks for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, keeping busy and, just the constant balancing act of, I guess, being a sort of modern-day Renaissance man in Hollywood.
Oh, my gosh.
That's so cool.
A man of many talents. So, Lito, since this is your first time on the show, it is fairly customary for us to ask, what is your story about how you got into A Nightmare on Elm Street? Because I've seen all the photos that you've posted from when you were very young, so you go way back with it.
I do. I go way back. So I guess I'm old enough, I'm no longer ashamed to say that I remember when I was a kid and the film first came out, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and I remember seeing the commercials on TV, and I was absolutely terrified. I mean, I'd seen a few horror films up to that point. I'd seen Halloween and Phantasm, and I think I'd seen a few other slashers, but the commercial to A Nightmare on Elm Street, I saw it on TV, and I was just absolutely shook to my very core. And that was just from seeing the commercial. I was way too young. My parents would never take me to see the film, obviously. But when the film came out on video, it was one of those things where it was like, I have to see this movie. I have to see this movie. So I believe I convinced my father to rent it for me because he was in the habit of renting movies that he probably shouldn't for his two young children. And we watched it, and I was just, I mean, completely, I don't know, I was horrified, but I was also absolutely enchanted. I knew that there was something, as everyone that loves this film does know, there was something completely unique and different while also being familiar. And I think part of it was just that it is a slasher film at its core, but I think that it deals with dreams and deals with something that every human being experiences. I think that rang very true to me. And of course, since I was old enough to, rent the film when it first came out and be of the age where I was coming into my own sort of cognizance at the time that Freddy started becoming such a pop culture icon, I fell completely into I don't want to say trap, but I fell completely under the spell of Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy and Nancy and all these characters, because it was just such a huge part of my youth and the youth of everyone that I was, peers with and going to school with. So like many people of my age and of that, era, it's just part and parcel of the experience of our pop culture, our zeitgeist of living in America at that time. So how could I, absolutely not become enchanted with Freddy?
That's so cool. I have to say something that I thought was really cool when we first met was that you're originally from Chicago too, and so am I. And do you feel like maybe like Chicago is like very horror centric? Like we all loved Halloween so much, and I feel like growing up in the 80s and 90s, like Nightmare was just everywhere in the city. Like every kid wanted to dress up as Freddy for Halloween. Every video store had like the huge cutouts of like Freddy. I don't know if other areas did it as much as we did, but I just feel like Chicago was so prevalent with horror and Nightmare.
Well, I think speaking to that kind of association, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You mentioned Halloween. I mean, Halloween takes place in Illinois. And if you were anywhere near Illinois, you, of course, immediately, kind of associated your neighborhood, if you lived in a, kind of suburban area, with the neighborhood in Halloween. And I think that also goes, part and parcel with Nightmare on Elm Street, because Wes, despite filming it in Los Angeles, he tried to find locations that were, kind of middle America-ish. So, you look at the homes in the area that Nancy lives in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and even the sequels to a large part, and it feels like middle everywhere America. So I think that might be part of what it was, in addition to just, in certain parts of the Midwest, there's not a whole lot to do. I mean, Chicago, there's a lot to do, but in some of the surrounding suburbs, unless you're willing to drive into the city, what do? You go to the video store. And of course, at the video store, you see all of, your peers and your classmates. And what do they all want to do? They all want to get scared. They all want to have a slumber party and watch slasher films. So I think that also is part of why it was such a huge part of our childhood.
That brings up then a good question, because I'm curious then how Ohio has fared with A Nightmare on Elm Street, even though it doesn't come in until the later movies. And, with Wes being from Cleveland, I mean, I can't say that I've seen too much Nightmare here other than people recognizing it for being a classic horror film that a lot of people really, really like. So that would make for a really good research project. But that is extremely, extremely interesting. And I'm wondering then, you said that you weren't really allowed to watch horror movies per se. So how did you start getting some of the memorabilia and some of the Freddy gear when you were a little bit younger then?
So I mean, I guess I wouldn't say that it's not I wasn't allowed to watch horror films. It's just that my mom, I think kind of frowned upon watching certain horror films. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, or I think you might be too young to actually remember this, but when I was a kid, certain local theaters, in addition to doing late night screenings of the Rocky Horror Picture Show on the weekends, on some weekends they would do like midnight showings of Friday the 13th films, either back to back or back to back to back. And like, my father was like always kidding that, oh, I want to take you guys to see those movies. And even though he was joking, he was kind of serious. And my mother would, always say like, oh, no way, they're too young and this and the other. So I think my father, he was a big fan of horror films too when he was growing up. So I think he was always wanting for us to become bigger horror fans than I think my mother was willing to let us become. And I think in large part it was because some of the horror of the 80s, as you know, was a bit more graphic and gruesome than some of the stuff that preceded it, in the previous decades. And I was always a big fan of Universal monsters, which I think my mother deemed okay. But anything that had, blood and gore or too much of the red stuff, she really frowned upon. And I just remembered, Paige, actually, you mentioned Chicago. We grew up with, I don't know if you know Svengoolie. At the time, he was called Son of Svengoolie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that, I think that was part of what kept me immersed in the horror world, because I watched a show all the time, and he tended to show films that were, they were older because it was easier for him to get the rights, and it was also, they didn't have to be as censored. So I think that kind of stuff was okay with my mother, but some of the modern stuff was not. But again, growing up in that era, it was almost inevitable that I would become so just enchanted, like I said, so enamored with this world of Nightmare on Elm Street and the character Freddy Krueger. And once I did, and I started really hanging out with, my fellow males of the same age and guys that I knew, they were all, the same way. So it just kind of fed off of each other. Like, oh, you got a T-shirt? Where'd you get that T-shirt? Spencer's Gifts, so I'd save my money and I would, run off to the mall whenever I had the chance and buy a T-shirt. And, my mom, even though she didn't like it, she wasn't going to, make me take it back. She's like, all right, fine. If that's what you like, wear it. So it was just that kind of thing. And I think once they realized that it was a true passion and it wasn't just this kind of disturbed sort of fascination, I think once they realized that, they were okay with it.
Now, did you ever go to like any costume shops or anything like that and like get like a glove? Do you remember back in the day they used to have that like super plasticky old school Freddy glove? I remember I got mine at Izzy Rizzy's in Chicago, and and I just remember like being so happy as a kid, like getting this super cheap bendable plastic glove.
So yeah, actually, that's funny that you mentioned that, because a friend of mine, Mark, I think he was the first person in our neighborhood on our block to get one of the official plastic ones. And I was so jealous that what I did is I actually went home and I crafted my own Freddy glove using empty toilet paper rolls.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I actually have a picture of that somewhere on my Facebook page. I actually cut the empty paper roll in half and then shaped it like the finger stalls and then jointed them together using those little brass things that you use, to bind paper sometimes. And then
yes, I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah,
because they kind of looked like rivets. And then I ate 4 popsicles in a row. I cut them to look like the blades, and I scotch taped them to the finger stalls. So
that was the most Nancy Freddy glove ever.
I know, it was so it was so budgeted, but I was so happy to just have this little fakey glove. And then of course, I think I want to say it was 1987 or 1988, my father and mother finally relented, and they not only let me buy a Freddy glove for Halloween, but they also bought me one of the first Ruby's Freddy Krueger pullover masks. And there's a picture of me again on my Facebook page somewhere wearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that they were pretty cool about it once they were quote unquote on board.
And those masks, man, those early masks that they produced were just horrible. Like looking
Yeah.
back at like how far they've come with like the silicone masks and stuff now, like you look at that and like, but as a kid though, that was scary,
Oh
like
yeah.
seeing that image, but they were just horrible.
Yeah, they were putrid, but I mean, yeah, like you said, as a kid at the time, because that was sort of the height of our technology, it was like, holy shit, look at what I have.
Right.
So then, Lito, with your long history of A Nightmare on Elm Street, you played an important role in Nightmare history with your involvement in Never Sleep Again. So how did that come to be? And that must have been pretty surreal. So what was that like to be involved? Because I know you got to meet Wes by doing that. So walk us through that experience.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So what happened was, I have to remember the timeline carefully. Let's see. So I met Daniel Ferrens, who was the writer and, well, he was one of the producers, and he was co-director of Never Sleep Again. I met him at a convention in Los Angeles, like when I first got to town, and I like went all gaga and like gushed over him, and I was like, oh my God, I love Halloween 6, and I know, some people don't, but I think it's so cool. And like, I remember when I got the producer's cut on VHS, and oh my God, and he was just really taken by the fact that, wow, this kid really likes really likes Halloween 6. And I told him, oh, my work email address is Dr. Win in Black, which is a character from the film, and I showed him my business card, and he was like, wow, you're not lying, you really like Halloween 6. So he always kind of, we kept in touch, and he would always kind of reach out to me when they had a project that he thought I might be interested in. Like they did a Crystal Lake mockumentary that appeared on some, he asked me to get involved in that as to play a phony newsman who I, of course, named Terrence Wynn.
Awesome.
Bringing it back to Halloween 6. And then after that, he was like, well, you're cool, and I like working with you, and you're hardworking, so I'll keep you posted if we have any stuff coming up. And I think I knew they were working on the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary, but I didn't really say anything at the time because I was like, well, maybe they'll have something for me at some point. And Dan and Tommy were kind enough to ask me to come aboard on a kind of like entry-level PA position where I was kind of doing a lot of data transfer from the cards from the camera to the computer, just kind of, little stuff like that. But then the more time passed, the more they were like, wow, he's diligent and he's hardworking and he keeps his nose clean and et cetera. Let's just keep giving him more tasks and more tasks. And of course, eventually they were, very, very kind enough to ask me if I wanted to come on board as co-producer. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. Like I was on set all the time, and I was there when they were interviewing people on location. And, one of those location interviews happened to be the office of Wes Craven in Hollywood. And what was really funny about that was when we interviewed Wes, he's sitting in this office that has it's just glass on all sides of the office, and two sides of those office glass walls are windows to the outside, and there's all this, sun coming, and then they're like, it's killing our shot. Like, what do we do? Hang up curtains, and they couldn't figure out how to hang the curtains. So I volunteered. I said, I'll hold the curtains up if you guys want, because we can't, do it any other way because I have a fairly, wide wingspan. So I'm sitting there holding the curtains up with my head like craned all the way around, like staring and like with this big smile on my face, like listening to Wes. And then every time like they would get a break in the story, Wes would like take a drink of water, and Dan and Tommy would be like, all right, lower your arms, like take a rest, collect yourself. And what was great was eventually Wes was so sweet at the end. He was like, once we started getting near the end of the interview, he'd be like, okay, let the curtain guy rest his arms, so.
Lito's like, that's cool. Me, I'm the curtain guy.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, I was just amazed and stunned and honored to just be there. And at the very end of the interview, Tommy was gracious enough to allow me to ask Wes for a photograph, and Wes obliged. And to this day, that's like one of my favorite pictures ever. So.
Was that your favorite interview? Because you got to see a lot. So, like, what were some of your favorite moments working on Never Sleep Again? Well, definitely Wes Craven.
Yeah, Wes was an amazing interview just because of his sheer intellect and the way that he's able to make everything cerebral while also making it accessible to people. And then Heather gave an amazing interview. I actually transcribed, I'd say like, I don't know, 75% to 80% of the interviews. So I heard everything from start to finish, basically. And Wes's interview was amazing. Heather's interview was amazing. I will say Rennie Harlan gave a fantastic interview. Sarah Risher gave an amazing interview. I mean, some of the stuff that's not included in the footage that was released, I was lucky enough to watch and listen to and transcribe. And I mean, I thought I was a super avid Nightmare fan, and I learned so much just, being there. So.
Do you think that they would ever release another like DVD version of like the unreleased interviews? I think that would be so cool, like an additional special features disc.
I can't say. I'm thinking probably not, just because it was such a labor of love putting that thing together, that I'm kind of doubting that they would. And that's unfortunate in some ways, but at the same time, I think they really got the best of what was there. There were a few things that I would hear and say, oh, I wish that was in there, or whatever. But the thing that really flipped my lid more than anything, and you guys will appreciate this, is I also was in charge of cataloging all the visual materials. So I got to see every single picture that was sent to us from everyone, and holy cow, there's still a trove of stuff that has not been released or not been seen by anyone yet.
Wow.
Which is unfortunate. And I'm not saying that to be like, hey, check what look at me, I'm so cool. But I mean, just seeing it, I was like, oh God, I wish I could get the stuff out. But
yeah, I'm just trying to imagine all these hours. I mean, the documentary itself is long enough, but all the extra stuff that didn't make it in, even on the extras on the DVDs, which I love, by the way, like for love of the glove, because I am so obsessed with Freddy gloves. I mean, there has to be just endless hours of extra information. Do you recall anything that wasn't added that you might be able to give us information on, or is it like top secret that you can't talk about because it wasn't in the doc?
Well, I mean, I'm not really allowed to divulge too many details because of the NDAs that I signed, but I will say, damn them, I hate NDAs, but I understand why they're there and I respect them. But I will say one of the coolest things I got to see were concept makeups for a few of the sequels, and those were very interesting, especially by the time it got to Freddy's Dead, because when it came to Freddy's Dead, they were like, do we go back to Nightmare on Elm Street 1? Do we do a combination of Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and modern Freddy? Do we incorporate elements of New Nightmare? Do we change it up? And some of the stuff that I think it's Bill Terrazakis, if I'm not mistaken, some of the stuff that he pitched as concepts are absolutely fascinating. I don't know if they're in the new book by Dustin McNeil. I honestly haven't had a chance to even look at the book, but I'm hoping they are, because that's the kind of stuff that I wish I could share, because it's like jaw-dropping. Some of them are so different than what you might, or different from what ended up on the screen. It kind of was shocking.
Wow. So when you then, I mean, you've seen all of that, and you were involved with Never Sleep Again, and it came out, and now you're part of Nightmare History. You had something really cool happen where you got to be Freddy. So how the heck did that go down? Because I'm imagining auditioning for that role had to have a lot of people vying for it, but you won out. And so I'm just curious what that process was like, what it was like playing Freddy, a part of that. I mean, talk about it.
So that's an interesting story. So a lot of what happens in Hollywood, I've come to discover over the years, is it's not what you know, it's who you know. And what happened was, the guy who basically created the Warner Brothers Horror Made Here Halloween event that was inaugurated last year. His name is David Woodruff, and he is son of Tom Woodruff Jr., who is the famous makeup artist from Amalgamated Dynamics. And they did stuff like Starship Troopers and Aliens versus Predator and Alien 3 and Alien 4, and it's Spider-Man and et cetera, et cetera. So David does the makeup for my wife and myself whenever we do cosplay or anything that, like, if I have a complicated makeup for a film that I'm doing, I'll ask him to come as my personal makeup person. And so David created this event, basically, and he pitched it to Warner Brothers, and the guy in charge of events at Warner Brothers basically said, I love it. It's fantastic. Oh, that's something that we've been looking for. And Freddy's a great thing. And of course, we own the property and blah, 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 blah. Well, part of the reason why David pitched it was because he knew for years that I've been wanting to play Robert's Freddy.
Oh my gosh.
And having grown up imitating Robert's Freddy and studying his every movement and his nuances and everything, like it's just been a dream come true or a dream that I had, I should say. And so David pitched it, and he came back to me and he said, we're pitching it, stand by, I'll let you know what's going to happen. And he suggested me to them, but they said, well, everyone has to audition, and we have to put the casting call out. That's just the process. We give it to a casting company and they announce it. And, he's going to have to come in. He has to prove his bones. We can't just say, okay, you're the guy. So David, gave me the news, and I said, that's fine. I'll apply and I'll send my pictures and, go through the process. And luckily they called me in because I obviously don't resemble Robert at all, but I think it's because when I pitched myself in my email pitch, I just basically explained to them everything that I'd done in the world of Nightmare on Elm Street and growing up in that era and et cetera, et cetera. So they had a lot of contenders. Yes, again, I don't want to sound conceited, but it was a role that a lot of people were, trying to get. And I think I actually went in on one of the last days. I was one of the last appointments that they had. And they explained to me that I went in and they said, okay, so here's the story. We're going to roll the camera and you're going to impersonate Freddy Krueger. And we want you to do this and that and the other. And then also do famous scenes and famous lines. And what was really funny is they had a sheet of paper on the side of the room that had a bunch of his more famous lines written on it. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, I think I'm good, but thanks. Again,
pardon me, I've got this.
Exactly. Not to sound again like an egoist, but I was like, I'm good. So
your
so
stuff.
So they're like, okay, whenever you're ready, we're gonna roll and action. And the guy just hit record, and they just stood there and they started watching. And for 5 minutes, I just did scene after scene, a line after line, and I jumped up on a chair and I did this, the thing from the end of Nightmare on Elm Street. You got their powers, I've got their souls. Come on! And I did the little, the hand gesture, and I did the, this is God, and just all this different stuff. And when I was kind of running out of steam, I just kind of stopped and looked, and they were both staring at me with their jaws kind of hanging open. And I was like, do you want me to do something else? I feel like, have I done something wrong? And the guy who was running the camera gave me one of the biggest compliments I think I've ever gotten. He said, no, it's just that I feel like I'm watching the fucking movie. So
that's awesome.
So awesome.
Yeah, so the next day they called and they offered me the lead, Freddy, because I had a stand-in not a stand-in, but a sub who came in whenever I needed breaks. But they called me in, and then David Woodruff was lucky enough to work with David Miller, who gave him pieces from... Yes. Yeah, the makeup was straight from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, which that was fucking surreal. When it came time to look in the mirror and see myself, it was just I can't believe that I'm putting on the actual pieces that, Robert wore, 30 years ago. And they contacted Anders, and Anders made them some gloves, and, they really went all out. And, it was a 6-night event, and I gave it my all. And a few people from the series actually from the actual film series were involved in the behind the scenes. And one of them at one point actually, I heard him talking behind a curtain to someone else at Warner Brothers, and they were speaking kind of in hushed tones, but David and I were close enough that we could hear them. And this guy who had done effects on a bunch of the Nightmare on Elm Street films said to one of the event coordinators, he said, I know Warner Brothers is trying to reboot this thing. He said, fuck it, why don't they just hire this fucking guy?
Ah,
Yes.
that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
so
is freaking
that was
awesome.
spot on. Like, it was your makeup, your swagger.
Yeah.
Like, it was like watching Robert. It was so beautiful and amazing, and I really wish they would consider casting you if they do remake it.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'm very humbled. I always told everyone, I said, I don't have the audacity to think that I'm actually filling his shoes, but I think I do a pretty decent job, because no one will ever do it like Robert did. But if I hear they're going back to the well on almost every franchise. I hear every franchise wants to, now that Halloween is doing it, and now that Friday the 13th is in the process of doing it, everyone wants to go back to the original story, or they want to reboot after the first sequel, or they want to this. And I'm like, if you want to do that, I know that, Toby Sexton, is out there. And I know that with all due respect, Roberto, is it Robert Lombardi? Is that his last name, correct?
Lombardi. Mm-hmm.
Roberto Lombardi. Yeah. With all due respect to these guys, I know they could knock it out of the fucking park too, but I'm like, I'm here if you, want to pay me very little to do
what you
something
love.
that a lot of people charge a lot for. So, yeah.
And you know what, Lito? I've talked about this a lot. Nightmare fans everywhere, I think, have talked about this a lot, but it doesn't matter if people look like Robert or copy him exactly. Unless, of course, it is a sequel and you get as close to Robert as possible if that's what they want. But I really think it is about capturing the element of who Freddy is and just knowing Freddy and having the right actor to be able to pull that off, to not look at the screen and be like, oh, that's the actor playing Robert playing Freddy, but looking at the screen and being like, that is the actor playing Freddy, just straight to Freddy, and you just believe it's Freddy because they're doing such a good job of understanding and knowing the character. And with you knowing the character so well, I think that would translate excellently to the screen in a new film.
I also feel like with that, I feel like it's a level of like respect. Like, we've talked about this a lot, where we say that, like, I think everyone in the fandom would be okay with another remake, or they would be okay with, a prequel or something, as long as they respected the original. And you, if you were to play Freddy, you obviously would respect and honor the character and the franchise. I think that's what the fans want. We don't want to be belittled with a blockbuster Freddy. We just want his story to really be told and continue to be told, which is why I think the fan films are so successful.
Yeah, and it really is about it's just about that, because with that new movie, and hate to bring that into it again, in another discussion, but it just felt like everybody behind the scenes did truly disrespect it. But yeah, I'm with you on that page. Is it a surprise that the both of us absolutely adore fan films, because they are so creative and they've been done so well, including The Confession of Fred Krueger, which definitely was a very good example of how somebody also can, portray Freddy Krueger without having to portray Robert Englund portraying Freddy Krueger.
And that's another thing. Someone like Kevin Roach, what he did was he embodied the essence and the vibe and the spirit of the character while not trying to be an imitation. Whereas, my directive was straight out, you need to be Robert Englund. So, that they could go either way, obviously. Yeah. I just feel like, I don't know, with the current vibe of what's happening in horror, I almost feel like eventually they're gonna say, let's go back to what people, seem to be clamoring for with the Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's go back to that style. My only, thing about it is with, Wes being gone, and with, the tragedies that have befallen poor Heather. It's like, I really wish, because I could see them writing, Nancy back and saying like, oh, she didn't actually die, and it was all just a nightmare of so and so, and I could see that happening, but it's like I don't know if, even given the right script, if she would decide to come back, So, I mean, especially because, again, Wes is gone. I don't know if she would ever want to go back there without him being involved or his blessing.
Well, that's a really interesting thing to think if she would or she wouldn't, because I know that Heather for years, and I think even recently, said she would love to portray Nancy again. But when it comes down to it, in that moment, even everybody else that would be involved in it, considering certain events, if they would do it, I am almost willing to bet that because of the love they have for it and the respect, if there is the respect for Wes and for what he created and for the films, that they would do it.
I mean,
I would hope so.
It's kind of, I mean, not to like toot our own horn or anything, Diandra, but that's kind of one of the reasons why she narrated our film, is because we were respecting the character, we were respecting Wes, and we were respecting the franchise. And, she had the chance to narrate our film for us, and that was beautiful and amazing. And it was after Wes passed away, and I just personally couldn't think of a better way to do it. And so I know that deep down, I know that she would play the character again. If she was in The Beautiful Dream, or being like the gatekeeper, guiding the children, I totally could see her doing it.
Well, I mean, like I said, there are stories to be told, and you're right. I mean, she came back and she narrated for you guys, and that was a beautiful testament and tribute to the power of the character and Wes and the franchise. So, I mean, I would hope, like I said, there is a story there. I mean, it's 30 years later. You can talk about how it took her, so long to find her way back to the plane that Krueger exists on, because he was deliberately, closing the gate to her. And, I mean, you could easily write her back into the franchise in a way that fans would be like, oh, fuck yeah, so yeah. I don't know. I would love to see it happen. Warner Brothers, if you give a shit,
Yeah, to see Nancy, like what I would love to see, because it was in the comics, is having Nancy be in The Beautiful Dream, and then you have Alice in the real world. And together, they're both fighting on two fields, and together for the first time, like these two major heroines and some of the other characters who survived making appearances again. I think that would make for one of those, pardon me, but fuck yeah movies.
Yeah, I agree.
So we brought up Confessions of Fred Krueger. And I don't know if Diandra, if you know this, or Lito, but don't we know the guy who scored that? Doesn't his name sound familiar?
I think his name is Chad, but I'm not totally certain. We should have done our research on this before coming on this show.
Lobo Velasquez, is that it? Isn't it something like that?
I think he's a fan of the New York Mets, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you got that one right. Yeah.
So, Lita, walk us through the story of the Confessions of Fred Krueger. Walk us through how you got involved with that, maybe what your inspiration really was for scoring that, and how you felt when it came out and premiered and got such fanfare.
Well, that was basically came about because of my friendship with Nathan Milliner, who, as you know, did the cover art of the book for Never Sleep Again that Tommy Hudson wrote, and Tommy was kind enough to let me edit and be involved in the creation of. And when it came time to, do cover art for the book, Tommy and I were discussing the idea of using the poster that we used for the documentary film, and Tommy was kind of saying, I'm not sure. I think I want to use something original. And do you have any ideas? And this, that, and the other. And I said, well, it just so happens I know the perfect person, and I'm friends with him online, and let me reach out to him and see what he says. And so I contacted him, and I, of course, gauge his interest, which was, of course, yeah, absolutely. So then it just became a matter of putting Tommy in touch with Nathan and letting the two of them kind of, discuss what they wanted and what was going to be on there. And I know I pitched a really rough, like MS Paint crappy version to Tommy that had a few of the ideas that ended up on the cover. And Tommy took what I gave him, and then him and Nathan basically brainstormed the rest between them. Because my idea was basically, it was like, I love the skull coming out of the sky, and, you know, we can use the film clapboard and we can use the boilerplate somehow. And it was just kind of all these kind of vague elements, but it wasn't until Nathan, you know, figured out how to put all that stuff together that it became what it was. And since we had that relationship, when he started talking about directing Confession of Fred Krueger, I approached him and I said, so here's the thing, you're doing this movie and I want to score it. So can I score it, and let me score it? So he basically said, well, absolutely. I think you're, you know, the right guy, and, you know, who could do this better than you? And I said, well, probably a few people, but, you know, Charles Bernstein's probably not going to do it. And some of the other people who are better than me, they're busy too, or they cost too much. So I started working on the film, and the first thing I did was I asked Nathan what kind of style he wanted. I said, because I'm envisioning a return to that retro synth Charles Bernstein kind of, you know, mixed with a little bit of orchestral here and there. And he said, absolutely, that's what I want. So the first thing I did is I went to Charles and I said, hey, buddy, how's it going? Can I please have your blessing to do the following things? And then I described to him everything I wanted to do. And he said, absolutely, you can do that. He said, just beware that I don't have I can't like give you the copyright for the actual tunes. And I said, well, it's okay, because I'm not actually going to use the theme, which I think it only appears in its actual form in the film once at the very end. And then I think it also appeared in the trailer that we created. But what I did do is I said, what I want to do is I want to do what David Arnold did for the film Casino Royale. In Casino Royale, David Arnold's score is built around permutations and variations of the James Bond theme, both harmonically and melodically. And it's almost like as the films progresses, the score continues to evolve in shape until it becomes the Bond theme that we know and love. And at the very end, you know, when he comes out with the rifle and he says, Bond, James Bond, then you hear the actual theme for the first time. So I told Charles, I said, that's kind of what I want to do with this film, is I want it to sound like it's sort of trying to figure out how to become Freddy's theme using the classic, you know, building blocks melodically and harmonically, but it's struggling to get there until the very end when, you know, we get that glimpse of, you know, Nancy and the Nightmare, who I heard they had another actress in mind. I wish I could remember who it was, but
I think her name was Diandra.
Diane, was it?
Diandra, lazy pants, probably. We were really forgetful on this show, guys. I mean,
I know.
This is terrible. No one's gonna want to listen to this.
we gotta take our ginkgo. So I mean, that's basically how I approached it, and I really tried to, you know, put as much as I could in there that had existed before in terms of the sound, not necessarily copying melodies, but really using building blocks and a sound in and of itself to make people feel that like they were back in Wes's world and they were back in the musical world of Nightmare on Elm Street. Because something that really bothers me as a composer is when there's a sequel or there's, you know, a follow-up film and the director comes along and says, oh, I want a completely new musical identity. And it's like, well, why the hell would you do that? What existed before was iconic, and it's come to be known as legendary, and everybody can whistle it and everybody can hum it. Why would you change it? Like, that really bothers me. And it's actually one of the things that, as much as I love the soundtracks and scores of the Nightmare films, it's something that really kind of bugged me as the films went on, that there was, and I know they're all, don't get me wrong, I know they're all tonally unique, but it kind of bothered me that every score was so different, you know, and there is something to be said for that. There is a strength to be found there, absolutely. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm hating on anything that any of those composers did, but it sits better with me when there is a consistent sound and there's a consistent usage of a theme that is iconic. And Charles's theme was so iconic and his sound was so iconic that it was like, I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel. Like, this should sound like this, and this is how it's going to be. So that's basically what I did. And there's a few in a couple of tracks in Confession, like there's a nod to Christopher Young's Nightmare on Elm Street 2, because one of the characters mentions something about daddy. So I used that kind of stinger that Chris Young used when Freddy said, "Daddy can't help you now." So I would do little things like that. But that's basically what I did.
And that's what makes those scores so special. So then you did the score as well for Don't Fall Asleep, which to me was so utterly beautiful in every sense. I remember listening to Paige, did we listen to the opening scene's music before you added it to the video, or was it, I'm trying to remember, but all I remember specifically was like basically being in tears because it was that beautiful, and that was the first thing I heard.
So when he sent over the tracks, he's like, line it up to this, line it up to that, and I'm like, okay, all right, I got it. And so I lined up that opening shot, and that opening shot, like, I think I sent it to the entire team immediately. I think I was at work or something, and I had my laptop, and I sent it to the entire team, and I said, you have to listen to this right now. I said, I don't care what you're doing. Stop what you're doing and listen to it. And Deandra's like, I'm in tears right now.
Yeah, it was
beautiful.
Stunning. And
then favorite track.
Our favorite, without a doubt. And this is another testament to your brilliance of when Nancy's talking to Dr. Sims, and you add in that little bit of the Dream Warriors theme, which I mean, that just is those nods, because we don't explicitly go into Dream Warriors, but like there it is, and you know the movie and you know that song, and it's just like, oh my gosh, nostalgia. It hits all the feels with that one.
Like
moment.
I wish you could have been at our premiere, Lito, because when that scene, there were a couple of scenes in the film that people like freaked out over. Of course, like Heather's narration, you hear a gasp and all this stuff. But when she is talking to Sims and the audience realized it was Dream Warriors playing, there was a collective, like, they went there, like, oh my God, a gasp. And that scene would not have been, I mean, it's beautiful that you guys killed it in the acting. And I never truly realized how much music does play a tone in things, because that scene, you shifted the tone into the right direction just by putting the piece that you wrote in there. It just was so beautiful.
Well, thank you guys very much. That means a great deal to me. I'm actually getting all misty-eyed hearing you guys say that. I mean, part of why, and I'm going to get misty-eyed again, so forgive me, but part of what makes this franchise so important to me is that I introduced it to someone who is very dear to me, my cousin Nathan, who was like a brother to me, and he passed away in 2014. So as I was scoring your film, I mean, he died at the age of 32. And as I was scoring your film, it was kind of, I was feeling those same things when I was writing, but I was feeling them even more so when I watched the film played back. Because that's what I do when I score a track or a scene. I compose it and record it, and then I play it back and watch it with the film to see if it's actually working. And I knew the Dream Warriors thing was working because there's something, like you said, it's not like hitting the, it's not too on the nose, and it's not hitting you over the head with it. It's just enough of a touch of it that it rings, not only, I think, to not sound humble, but it rings emotionally resonant to the scene, but it also rings emotionally resonant to the nostalgia that we all feel. And when I watched that scene, when I heard those notes and I heard them talking about Weston Hills and the teenagers and how special they were and how they had this collective fear of a boogeyman, it took me straight back to 1987. I think it was fall of 87, and watching that movie on VHS with my cousin. And that's when I knew it was working, because it was little things like that, I sat down and I watched these scenes and I said to myself, if I wasn't scoring this, but I was a fan in a theater because I view every film as something that would show in a theater, not just, not quote unquote, just on a computer screen. I think, what would I want to hear in this scene? And that's why I did things like I brought back Alice's theme, even though it was not really her theme fully evolved, but it was there enough that people, if they know it, they go, oh my God, that's Alice's theme. Yeah. Or like the little hints of the hypnocell motifs. I mean, all of those things have an established musical identity that have existed for decades. And it would be just, in my opinion, it would be pure hubris to not use those things, So it's like, well, shit, I'm going to dip into the well and I'm going to do it the way I think fans would want to hear it done. And if they don't like it, well, that's fine. It's not for everyone. But this, to me, works. And, that's why I did it the way I did. And I mean, I think the greatest honor in getting to score that film was getting to write an actual theme for Nancy, because she has a little bit of a theme in New Nightmare, but it's not really Nancy's theme. It's really Heather's theme. And it's more directly, I think it's more Heather and Chase's theme. So being able to go back and write a theme that kind of spoke to the spirit of Nancy and kind of spoke to her beauty and her power and the essence of what makes her such an iconic and classic character was something that I was like, oh my God, this is the biggest thrill of this gig. I mean, everything else was wonderful, don't get me wrong, but just getting to do that was something very special that I'm so thankful for.
Well, I have to say, something that a lot of people don't really know is that, they know that the composer and the director usually work hand in hand really well together. The director usually has a vision of what they want for sound, and that's typically how it goes. And when we asked you to come on board, you and I talked a lot about certain things, and I just remember telling you, Lito, just score this as if it was your film. I trust in you. And I think I had like one thing. I was like, the only thing I want is during that bridge scene, if you could just make it sound like Nightmare 1. Everything else, do your own thing. And when you would send the music to me, there were a few times that I would cry. I would plug it into the scene, and I just felt like, wow, like he really gets me. He really gets this film, and he really gets this character. And I just was so thankful to have you, and so thankful to Diandra for introducing us, because I feel like what we made was magic and like lightning in a bottle.
Well, thank you again, and thank you for the honor. And yeah, absolutely. That is also one of the great joys that I had working on that film, was the freedom that I was given, the trust that I was shown, because I worked on projects, honestly, with other directors who shall remain nameless, that it's like so many pages of notes for one track. And I'm like, you do realize this is 3 minutes of music, right? Like, yeah. And I haven't even started composing, and you've already given me like 3 pages of notes, and then you give them the track, and they're kind of like indecision and uncertainty. And I don't want to, sound mean, but their kind of insecurity leads to such large revisions that it's like, dude, you're at this point, you're betraying the essence of this scene. Like, you need to let go, So, I mean, that's something that I was so lucky to have on this film, and I'm so thankful for. But I mean, even when you gave me, the funny thing is, I remember that email where you said, I want this scene to sound like Nightmare on Elm Street 1. And I think I wrote back saying something like, oh, come on, they're standing on a bridge. That's exactly what we need to hear in that scene. So we were totally in sync of that. It was like, if I don't use this, again, it's pure hubris. It's like these people that, it's like the guy that scored GoldenEye, Pierce Brosnan's first film as Bond, and it was this like techno electric European funk music. And I was like, where the hell is the James Bond theme? Like, no one wants to hear this. Like, right. You're introducing a new Bond. You better use the James Bond theme left and right. Otherwise, the audience is going to be like, is this a temp score? Like, I don't understand what's going on.
Right.
And there were so many elements of just that, I mean, between the film itself and your score, I mean, going back to it, it just is completely and truthfully, I feel very, very true to the story of what happens in the Nightmare on Elm Street universe. And they work together so well that it just feels like a continuation. And I'm not saying this because I was involved, but watching it, I love watching it. And I love having other people watch it. I'm like, you got to watch this movie. And they're like, but aren't you in it? And I'm like, yeah, but just forget about that. You just have to see the other elements of this movie between the score and the film itself. If you are a Nightmare fan, you are going to love it. And I have to tell you, Lito, in addition with the Dream Warriors nod at the very end when you bring it back for that punch moment that really goes into the third film, that is one of my favorite moments there. And that's also Anthony Brownlee's one of his favorite moments as well. Actually, though, that is his favorite moment of the entire film, is that moment when Nancy accepts and you hear the Dream Warriors theme. Like, that is just such a powerful ending there. I mean, and I know we have the scene in between, which is a nice wrap up with the beautiful dream. But spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it, you should go watch it. But that just packs such a powerful punch, and then you go into Nancy's theme there, which you tease throughout the entire movie, and then we get to hear it in its entirety in the credits.
Well, it's funny too, because that's something that speaks to the power and the strength of that film. Is it's the story is it's so well written, and it's directed with such a mastery and deep love and knowledge of what it needs to be, and the performances are all speaking so true to the moments. Every single specific moment in that film feels real and true to who those characters are and who they need to be, that when you get material like that, it's like Nathan's film, Confession of Fred Krueger, or it's like the film that I scored last fall that my wife happens to play a part in. When you get stuff like that, your job is so much easier as a composer, because it's almost like there's only one way to score the scene. And I would never say my music is so good that that's the only way it could be scored. Like when you hear a John Williams score, you're like, well, the only way you could ever score this film was like this. Like, that's it. Like, the Raiders theme existed before the film came along. It was just waiting to be a film so John could put the theme in the movie. And that's how I feel like every film score should be. It should work not in terms of drawing the emotion, but heightening the emotion. Paige, you touched on this earlier. You see the performances happening when you're directing and when you're acting and when you're there day to day. You see them when you're editing. You feel the power, but music it's that last element that it doesn't do the work for the performances. It heightens them. It should anyway. Composers who take away from the film by being too loud or bombastic or their style not meshing, they're just doing a disservice to the film and to themselves. So I always just try to speak to the truth of the moments and to the overall story. So I'm glad you think I did. I'm glad people think I did. And like I said, the Nancy theme, I mean, that's just a part of the theme. The whole theme is actually 2.5 minutes long, and I still have to finish recording it because it's just sitting on top of a pile of projects that I need to do. But
if you ever get that, I would love to hear that, and to have, if you release that for us to have some part in being able to share that with the world, because I think that definitely deserves to be heard.
Absolutely. I will one day, I promise.
But I know you're very, very busy being the Renaissance man that you are.
Well, it's just a balancing act, that's all. When you have as many interests as I do, it's just a matter of, I've always tried to live my life. I just want to do what I love. And sometimes that takes a lot of juggling, but it's worth it because I get to do, wonderful things like work with people like you and leave behind. When I do leave this plane of existence, I'll have left things behind that will forever exist. And that's always been my goal.
So with that said, Lito, and everything that we've talked about from your history and the amazing things that you've had the chance to do, to people listening right now that are fans, no matter the age, no matter where they are, with dreams or things that they love, what words would you offer them?
So that's an interesting question, because I just watched a video the other day with that guy from the show Dirty Jobs. I don't remember his name.
Yeah. Oh shoot, he talks about manufacturing a lot. I know I see his face, but I'm drawing a blank.
It's Joe something, isn't it? I think. Anyway, people will know what I'm talking about. They know the guy. You've seen him before. But I just watched a video on YouTube the other day, and he said he had this. He said, I have advice for people that are just coming out of school or coming up in the world and young adults. And when people tell you to follow your dream, don't listen to them. And he started to tell this story about how that's just going to end up in most cases, the majority of cases, getting you nowhere. And you're not going to have a career and you're not going to be able to support people and blah, 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 blah. And I was just sitting there watching and I was like, okay, I understand his point, but at the same time, screw you. Because where would we be if it weren't for the dreamers, if it weren't for people that said, you know what, I'm following my heart no matter what? We wouldn't have amazing icons like Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci at one point packed it in and moved home until Scorsese was like, what are you doing? You're an actor, get back out here and get in my film. And then he became Joe Pesci. We wouldn't have Harrison Ford, who was ready to pack it in and become a carpenter. We wouldn't have Wes Craven. If Wes had given up after multiple times of being told no, we wouldn't have A Nightmare on Elm Street. The fact that he kept pitching that and he kept plugging, we can thankfully look back and say, Wes, thank God you didn't give up. So it's different in every case. I wish I had the magic bullet advice for everyone, but like I said, my advice to myself, and people can take from this what they will, is be persistent, be hardworking, try to be humble. That's a hard lesson I've had to learn, unfortunately, over the past few years. And I think I have, thankfully, but it's cost me a few things in not recent years, but, a few years back. Just follow your dream, follow your heart, because as crazy as my existence is, people look at me and they're like, yeah, he's that weirdo guy that kind of acts and composes and edits and books and produces documentaries, and I think he cosplays and he's always throwing pies at his wife, and all these things that I do, they're all interests that I've had my entire life, is acting and clowning and my pantomime and cosplaying and horror and composing and playing music and performing music and directing, and I just tried to always listen to, rather than my brain in some cases, I've tried to listen to my heart. And it's taken me to some really amazing and wonderful places. But it's not just that, it's the work. When the opportunity presents itself, when there's a score that needs to be written, and you wake up and you look at the computer or the music paper, some people, and there's nothing there, and you're going, oh my God, what am I going to do? You have to just sit down and work it out. You have to be ready to sit there for 15 hours, with a couple of meal breaks and do it. And, when an opportunity comes along like Warner Brothers, even though you're like, yes, I got the job. Oh my God, I got the job. What the hell am I doing? I must be crazy, because I think every actor feels that to some extent, no matter what the project is. I actually just got cast in a film that's shooting later this year with one of the Nightmare on Elm Street alum. I can't say yet what the film is, but when I was told I had the part, I was like, yes. And then I started looking at the script and it was like, oh my God, what have I done? Oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. We all deal with that. I'm sure you guys dealt with it when you were performing or directing. It's part of being an artist. But like I said, don't give up, do the work, follow your heart, and amazing things can happen and some dreams can come true.
Isn't that's so perfect? Even in Dream Warriors, Nancy says, in your dreams, you have the power to be anything you imagine. Mm-hmm. And what you just said just speaks volumes to that.
And I think each of us have, without a doubt, felt that very, very real truth that Lito touched upon. And I echo that, Lito, and I think that is a wonderful thing to tell people, because and his name is Mike Rowe, by the way, but when I used to work for an industrial company, I remember him saying that. And I get what he was trying to get across, but I was feeling the same way as you. I just thought, you know what, that is no way, you know, to encourage people or to tell people. There are certain people who undoubtedly will go down the career in which you're trying to encourage, but at the same time, it's not meant for everybody. And
Right.
there are people who do take risks and make a difference in this world in a different way. And I think both paths are okay, but people
Yeah.
should definitely follow what they love, because life is too short. And as far as I know, and I don't know what you guys believe, but this could potentially be the only chance we have to truly live out life, leave a legacy, and make a difference, because we were put on this earth to do so, to leave a mark. And I think everybody just has to figure that out for themselves. So thank you, Lito, for your words of wisdom.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. I don't know if they're wisdom, but they're words.
They're definitely words of wisdom. They're definitely. So, Lito, with all of your activities and everything going on, how can people find you online, whether it's a Facebook page or a project or anything that you have coming up or right now?
So you can always go to IMDb and punch in my name, Lito Velasco, and it'll pull up my resume, and it has a list of all the stuff I've done and all the stuff that I'm working on. And then also you can go to Facebook. You just go to facebook.com and type in Hollywood Lito, and that will pull up my Facebook business/artist page, which I know people, like one of my friends was like, oh, Hollywood Lito. Oh, you think so? But I was like, you know what? It's clever and it gets to the point. Shut up. So, if they go to Instagram, you can just search Lito Velasco 23, and then also on Twitter, it is also Hollywood Lito. And I nowadays I'm better about Instagram than most things, because it's just so fast. Like I love Facebook and I love seeing what everyone else is up to, but there was a point in time when I was like, I am on here way too much. So I've really tried to curtail my Facebooking, and Twitter. Anything on Twitter usually comes from Instagram anyway, you know, because you can link the two. So that's how you can follow my shenanigans.
Fabulous, fabulous, Lito. Well, thank you again so much for your time, for your talents, and for your friendship. And so, with that said, it has been a pleasure. We would love to have you on again in the future, and we very much look forward to everything you have coming up.
Yes. I'm so excited. Thank you, Lito, so much for coming on.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.